Well, I hope you've had a good day. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're excited about the next few minutes that we have to study God's Word together. You know, we are blessed, and I hope we let God know every day how grateful and thankful we truly are for those blessings. If you're not well and you're sick, please let us know. Number one, so we can pray for you. But number two, if we can do anything at all for you, we want to know about it. So if you're sick, we love you. Let us know so we can pray for you. We're in Job chapter 34. That's where we left off last week. We left off in the middle of the chapter. Now, you might remember from Job chapter 33, we were talking about Elihu. Elihu's speech starts in chapter 32. And in chapters 32 and 33 of the book of Job, you remember that Elihu's very apologetic, right? He's this young man, and he knows he shouldn't speak because he's in the presence of older men, but he's had all he can take. He needs to expose some things, so he's going to say what he needs to say. And remember, he thinks he's speaking on behalf of God. In fact, he thinks what he speaks is inspired. He said as such in chapter 32. Well, so in chapters 32 and 33, what we really notice is Elihu is very comforting in a sense. He really wants to help Job. At least that's the way I feel when I read chapters 32 and 33 of Job. But you get to chapters 34 and 35, and what we find is Elihu becomes hardened in the way that he thinks about Job's situation. He's not as comforting anymore. And I suppose there's a number of reasons for that, but possibly when he starts to think about Job questioning the justice of God in chapters 34 and 35, he really maybe starts to see, at least in his mind, what he thinks Job to actually be saying, and that's just not all right with him. So he's going to give it to Job. Well, in chapter 34, where we left off last week, remember Elihu tells the men of understanding to listen to what he has to say. And we said the men of understanding, they're possibly the other elders that are around. So Elihu is going to have something to say to Job, but he wants to persuade the elders, because if he can persuade the elders, well, then perhaps the elders can persuade Job. Well, what we read, we'll start in verse 12. We left off in verse 15, but verse 12, of a truth God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Who gave him charge over the earth, and who laid on him the whole world? If he should set his heart to it and gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to the dust. Well, who set God in charge of the whole world, right? Well, we remember the answer to that question is nobody. That's just, God is the king. That's a part of his nature. Nobody just assigned that to him. Nobody gave him authority over the earth. He has authority over the earth because that's just a part of who he is. Well, another thing Elihu brings out is God is a God of justice and truth. We see that in the book of Psalms like we've read before. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. God is going to do what is right. But then we also see the power of God. God is so powerful that if he wanted to, he could withdraw his breath from all humanity, and at the very moment that he did that, every human would expire. Humanity would cease to exist. Because like we said, we rely on God for every single thing that we have. In him we move and breathe. In him we move and have our being. Right. Well, we get to verse 16. This is where we're starting with new thoughts tonight. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty? It doesn't make sense, Job. It doesn't make sense that this God that is all-powerful and is a God of justice and truth would pervert justice. That does not make sense. Are you going to really say that the one who is truly righteous and is truly mighty is guilty of perverting justice? Are you going to say that, Job? Because if you are, I need to tell you something. Who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man? Look who has the authority to govern the world. Right? No human being that is under the rule of a king would ever look at a king and say, worthless one. But God has that power to say to people that occupy great earthly positions of power, positions of authority, He looks at them and He's able to just dismiss them. Who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of His hands. Well, notice God doesn't show favoritism. While an earthly king, no matter how good he is, could still be persuaded when it comes to riches, God cannot be persuaded by riches. He doesn't pay more attention to the rich. He pays the same attention to the poor. That's something we see too. Let's divert our attention for a second. Chase a rabbit, I guess. Moving away from the book of Job, we think about the life of Jesus. There's something foundational to the character of Jesus, and that is Jesus gave importance to the minority of people and not just the majority of people. In other words, Jesus just didn't minister to people that had money or people that always looked the same. Jesus noticed the poor. He noticed the lame. He noticed the sick. Jesus noticed the people that others probably wouldn't have noticed. And if we're going to claim to be disciples of Jesus, our mission is to share the gospel with all. That includes not just with the majority, but that includes sharing the gospel with the minority of people, regardless of what they look like, regardless of how they talk, regardless of how they act. All people deserve to hear the gospel. And if we're going to be like Jesus, we're going to need to do that. Now, that just reminded me of that thought when we're reading about partiality in the book of Job. So we'll quit chasing that rabbit and we'll get back to the book. In a moment they die. At midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand. For His eyes are on the ways of a man, and He sees all his footsteps. We know that there is no secret sin that we could commit. It doesn't matter if we do it in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter if, how far you remove yourself from the possibility of other human beings seeing you. God always sees, because it's like we talked about before. God is so high and He can look down, and it's like He can observe everything that everybody does. God's everywhere. We can't hide from God. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves. There you go. You can't run from God. For God has no need to consider a man further, that he should go before God in judgment. It's not that God needs to call somebody before Him and they need to go to court, and God needs to explain Himself, and the person He's accusing needs to explain himself, and then they need a jury to decide. No. When God executes His judgment, that is it. He doesn't need to think about it. His mind is made up. He shatters the mighty without investigation and sets others in their place. Thus, knowing their works, He overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see. Again, the wicked get what they deserve, right? We've seen that throughout the entire book of Job. Because they turned aside from following Him and had no regard for any of His ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to Him, and He heard the cry of the afflicted. So this idea that Job has already thrown out throughout the book, that these rich people that are wicked, they continue to get richer and they continue to be successful, and God doesn't do anything about it. And because they continue to get richer, they afflict the poor, they extort from the poor. The poor suffer because of the wickedness of man. And Job has said, these wicked men, they prosper, they're successful, whereas God, why doesn't he do anything? Well, Elihu is kind of refuting that way of thinking, because Elihu says, no. The rich, they might afflict the poor person, and the poor might cry out to God, but guess what? God will hear that cry, and he will do something about it. When he is quiet, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can behold him? Whether it be a nation or a man, that a godless man should not reign, that he should not ensnare the people. For has anyone said to God, I have borne punishment, I will not offend any more. Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then make repayment to suit you, because you reject it? For you must choose and not I, therefore declare what you know. Men of understanding will say to me, and the wise who hears me will say, Job speaks without knowledge, his words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. Job, if you're going to continue to use the words that you use, if you're going to continue to speak about God in the way that you've been speaking about him, which appears to be very arrogant, I hope God tries you. And I hope he does it without any grace and mercy. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. We see here that Elihu seems to think that Job has no hope, that Job has walked a path that is contrary to God's will, and he is so far gone it doesn't seem like he can do anything to get himself out of the mess that he's made. But it gets a little worse in chapter 35, because in chapter 35 we start in verse 1, and Elihu answered and said, Do you think this to be just? Do you say, it is my right before God? Well, from what we just read in chapter 34, remember, nobody really has a right to summon God to court, because God's already made up his mind, and God's just, and he's right, he's fair, he doesn't show partiality. Well, here we go. Do you think this to be just? Do you say it is my right before God? Job, do you think that you're right? That almost in a sense you're more righteous than God? Is that what you're going to try to argue, Job? We've already seen Job has these many avowals of innocence. He lists 14 specific sins. You remember that passage. Job said he was not guilty of committing these 14 specific sins. And remember what we said. What was interesting about that is, if Job is lying, he's to be cursed. And everybody would know from the curse that Job is lying. But if a curse doesn't follow, then it seems that Job is right. Well, Elihu seems to be drawing on that. Job, you claim you're so innocent. But then you remember passages we've read, what Job has said about God. God, you use me as target practice. You shoot your poison arrows at me. You build up an army against me. I try to get up and you just tear me back down. And it seems that God is just beating poor, pitiful Job to death. Well, what Elihu takes is he takes his vow of innocence, and he says, Job, you just think you're more righteous than God. Now, Job has never said he's more righteous than God, but that's what Elihu has taken him to say. Here we go. That you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had not sinned? So, in other words, he interprets Job as saying, God, if I'm going to experience suffering and punishment for not having sinned, why should I try not to sin? What's the difference? It should be if I sin, I get punished. If I'm obedient, I get blessings and I'm rewarded. What we see from what we see from Elihu, I'm telling you, these friends, you get them confused. What we see from Elihu in chapter 35 is we see Elihu fail to understand how particular Job's situation actually is. And right, that's what the other friends did. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. That's what they failed. That Job's situation is special. It's not what you generally find. So he's letting Job have it. I will answer you and your friends with you. Listen up, Job. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds, which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? Go look up, Job. Look at the clouds. Number one, when you do that, you're going to be filled with wonder. But number two, when you do that, you're going to realize how small you actually are. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? Job, if you sin, it's not like God suffers from that in the sense that he loses some of his qualities. It's not like, Job, when you sin, God becomes less powerful, or when you sin, his knowledge is diminished in some type of way. And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? So Job, if you sin, it's not like you can really hurt God in the sense that you like knock him off of his throne. Okay, that's not going to happen. He's not threatened in that way. But two, Job, let's look at the converse of that. If you do good, what are you going to persuade God to do just because of your good that you've done? You're not. Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness concerns a man like yourself, and your righteousness a son of man. Job, look, your sins and your obedient actions, they do affect mankind, okay? And we see that throughout the Bible. We've talked about this before on a Wednesday night in class at Eastwood. We've talked about, like the idea of the covenant in the book of Deuteronomy. You do this, I'll bless you. But if you're not obedient to me, I'll curse the land. Okay, so everybody's going to suffer. The ground's not going to produce fruit. I'm not going to open the wombs of your women. All these different things. Sins hurt people. Good deeds generally benefit people. Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is my maker? Who gives songs in the night? Who teaches us more than the beast of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens? That's a good place to stop, because that gets us to a very interesting thought that we're going to need more time to discuss next week. I hope you are doing well. Again, I can't wait to see everybody Sunday. God bless.